Greetings and salutations, and welcome to the Unitarian Universalist Congregation of Salem's worship service. We are so glad that you have tuned in to view this service today and hope that you find something meaningful to take away with you. I would like to introduce a couple of people. You are familiar with both of them if you have been coming to UUCS. First off, I'd like to welcome Brenna Norval as a new member of the worship team and a celebrant. You may recognize Brenna from helping to lead the Building Sacred Ground new membership classes as membership co-chair, being a host, and playing bells during the Christmas Eve services. We are so glad that Brenna has joined the worship team. Also, welcome to Reverend Mark Gallagher, our guest speaker today and 3 additional Sundays this summer. The Reverend Mark Gallagher served for 21 years as pastor of the Unitarian Universalist Church in Vancouver, Washington, having previously served several other West Coast congregations briefly. He still lives in Vancouver and has a private practice ministry of preaching, teaching, and leading workshops. He has spoken many times here at UUCS, and last spring was our sabbatical minister as our Reverend Rick took a break. Welcome back, Reverend Mark. It's always good to hear you speak. So sit back for an inspiring service and welcome.
Our opening hymn today is "'Tis a Gift to Be Simple." It's number 16 in the gray hymnal. "'Tis a gift to be simple, 'tis a gift to be free, 'tis a gift to come down where we ought to be, and when we find ourselves in the place just right, 'twill be in the valley of love and delight. When true simplicity is gained, to bow and to bend we shan't be ashamed. To turn will be our delight, till by turning we come round right."
Every Sunday, we come together in community to share our non-judgmental thoughts and ideas. One of the ways we share together is to join our voices in saying our affirmation. Please join me now in saying our affirmation. Love is our doctrine. Compassion is our way. Here we seek to create a joyful home for free religious exploration, build a community of caring fellowship, nurture the hopes, and serve the needs of our world. Come into the light. Come into this time of worship. As we gather in spirit with others, we light the chalice to remind us of the love, justice, and non-judgment that binds us all together. All are welcome here. Each week, we light 3 chalices. The first is for those of us in this congregation, the Unitarian Universalist Congregation of Salem. We light our second chalice for our partner church in Shemin-Falva, Transylvania, Romania. And we light our third chalice for our children and youth in lifespan religious exploration and in our world at large. Don't forget to check out the weekly children and family service via Zoom at 10 a.m. each Sunday.
Each week, we exercise and try to grow our capacity for compassion. And so I invite you now to bring into your mind someone you know who is suffering or may be in some sort of distress these days. Let your mind open, and may there come into it someone you know who is in distress. And consider the specific nature of their suffering, be it a physical illness or injury, be it emotional distress, of some sort of difficult situation that they might find themselves in. Think of them and picture their particular suffering and distress. Feel your connection with them. And in your mind, send them feelings of mercy, feelings of loving kindness. Wish them relief from whatever it is that weighs upon them. And if you wish, you may say their name aloud in the place where you are now. And to them, say inwardly or with your voice, may your sufferings be relieved. May your worries be eased. We also practice awakening the gratitude in our hearts. And so I invite you now to become aware of some things in your life that are deserving of gratitude. Ponder that for a moment. Things in your life that are deserving of gratitude. And hold these things or one of them in your mind for a moment and breathe a few breaths of genuine appreciation as you contemplate this, knowing that it is not guaranteed to you. And if you wish, you may mention one or some of those things aloud in the place where you are. And I invite you also to share your joys and sorrows on the website. The way to do that is showing on your screen.
Judgments seem to want to be objective, sensory-based observations. And to be judgmental seems to be coming from a totally personal experience perspective. So here's a way of thinking that does neither. Koans. As Gary Z. McGee explains it, koans are self-paradoxical riddles used as a meditation discipline in Zen Buddhism. The point of the koan is to exhaust the analytical and ego-based mind in order to reveal the more intuitive no mind. They are not about arriving at an answer, but to see for ourselves that our intellections can never provide us with a completely satisfying answer. Some might even claim that koans are anti-intellectual, but they are neither anti-intellectual nor intellectual. The Zen koan serves as a scalpel used to cut into the mind of the meditator. It's a hammer used to shatter fixed thinking, a Rubik's Cube of words for the mind to unravel. Koans are not merely black and white riddles that our mind figure out suddenly and proclaim, aha, I've got the answer. Koans are ambiguous and paradoxical, waiting for our minds to open up enough to allow the space for deep intuition to emerge, beyond knowing and into no-minding, through the use of imaginative mindfulness. Is that not the opposite of what we think of when we think of judgment and judgmental? A famous koan is, what is the sound of one hand clapping? Here is an example of another koan called Muddy Roads. Tanzan and Ikaido were once traveling together down a muddy road. A heavy rain was still falling. Coming around a bend, they met a lovely girl in a silk kimono and sash, unable to cross the intersection. "Come on, girl," said Tanzan at once. Lifting her in his arms, he carried her over the mud. Ikaido did not speak again until that night, when they reached a lodging temple. Then he could no longer restrain himself. "We monks don't go near females," he told Tanzan, "especially not young and lovely ones. It is dangerous. Why did you do that?" "I left the girl there," said Tanzan. "Why are you still carrying her?" This koan reminds Gary McGee of the following quote by Rumi. "Out beyond ideas of wrongdoing and right-doing, there is a field. I will meet you there." Ikaido is so caught up in the rightness and wrongness of Tanzan's actions that he becomes a victim to the static past at the expense of the dynamic present. Tanzan has already let it go. Life is counterintuitively situational. The human condition is never cut and dry. There are rules and there are laws, some of which are in balance with greater cosmic law and some of which are not. Sometimes the right thing to do is the wrong thing according to convention. Let me say that again so they start messed it up. Sometimes the right thing to do is to do the wrong thing according to convention. Sometimes morality is just as muddy as the road Tanzan and Ikaido were traveling down. I will leave you with this thought. Out of nowhere, the mind comes forth. The Diamond Sutra.
We all know we are not supposed to be judgmental, but it's easier said than done, isn't it? Sometimes it's even hard to be clear about when we are being judgmental. Many times in life, we are called upon to make judgments, and it seems to me that it's not always clear how to exercise judgment without being judgmental. What do we mean by exercising judgment in the positive sense, like so-and-so has always shown good judgment? To form a judgment means to arrive at an opinion or an understanding through carefully considering the matter with an open mind. To come to a well-considered reckoning of what is right and wrong, or what will work out well. This kind of good judgment stands in contrast with, on the one hand, confusion or indecision, that is, lacking any clear opinion or understanding, and on the other hand, prejudice or bias, that is, forming an opinion on the basis of assumptions or group loyalty. Although we may sometimes bristle at the term judgment, I can hardly think of a more important liberal religious value. Our way of religion is based on the right of an individual to say, after careful consideration, this is my judgment on the matter. This is what I think is right. I'd go further and say we have a responsibility to make judgments. When I say judgment, I hope it's clear I'm not talking about this is what I like. This is what I feel comfortable with. Those are mere preferences. They certainly have their place, but judgment goes beyond that. It takes preference into account, plus a whole lot more. Empathy for others, understanding of how things work, ideals, aspirations, traditions, and so forth. Judgment says, all things considered, this is what's right. This is what's important. So you see, we are talking about value judgments. Some people say, I try to stay away from making value judgments. Mostly I observe what we mean when we say something like that is that we try to avoid putting others down or butting into other people's business or being arrogant in our value judgments. In other words, we try to avoid being judgmental. But occasionally, someone really does mean that they're attempting to avoid making any value judgments. They are trying to employ a philosophy which regards no way of living as better or worse than any other, just different. There's a value in that up to a point. There is indeed more than one good approach to most things. For example, in one cultural context, a certain gesture is the customary respectful greeting. In another cultural context, a different gesture signals that same respect. One is not better than the other, they're just different. Even though one approach may feel unfamiliar to an individual and therefore not feel right to them, with conscious reflection, we can realize that there's no need for a comparative value judgment in a case like that. But it's a different picture. If instead of variant ways of showing respect, we are comparing essentially different qualities of relationship, like respect and disrespect. I could be wrong, but in my judgment, respect is better. Sounds like you're making a value judgment there. Yes, of course I am. What we need is more discussion of the value of particular judgments, not a dismissal of value judgments generally. Imagine trying to live without making any value judgments. If I step in front of a truck, I'll be run over, but who's to say it's better to live than to die? Who's to say kindness is really better than cruelty? A life of kindness is not better than a life of cruelty. They're just different. Our value judgments may be explicit and tested or simply assumed, but they are necessary. Attending to them consciously and carefully is a responsibility. So if value judgments are okay, what about this other thing, being judgmental? Being judgmental isn't just exercising judgment, it's judgment with an attitude. In being judgmental, we stand there with our arms folded across our chests, making pronouncements from on high. It's essentially disdainful. The point is to place ourselves above whoever or whatever we are being judgmental toward. That's disgusting. Oh, that's ridiculous. When we say things like that, we might as well write on the chalkboard, I am being judgmental. And then there's the classic, I simply cannot understand how they could do such a thing. As though the inability to understand is a mark of virtue. It's a way of trying to say, I am so far from those people that I can't even imagine how they think. Now, it may be that you can't imagine their way of thinking, but to don that as a cloak of honor is judgmental. And that judgmental attitude is the voice of ego. Always. It's never about the correctness of our opinion. It's always a matter of the ego trying to justify itself or exalt itself. The official face of judgmentalness is the sneer. Sometimes we hide it behind a polite surface, but we know when we are sneering inwardly, and really other people usually sense it too. It's perfectly possible to make value judgments and act on them without adopting this sneering, judgmental attitude. It's even possible to impose those judgments on others without being judgmental. A parent may lovingly correct a child. A friend or even a stranger may say, "Excuse me, I think what you're doing is not right. Please reconsider." When we are making judgments about it being good to tell the truth, good to be generous, good to keep learning, bad to do violence, bad to pollute the air, bad to hold certain opinions, let us keep a watch on our attitude. What is the nature of the game we are playing? Is it, well, we're all here striving to live with integrity, and I think that what I have to say might be a contribution to that? Or is it more like, take that, you scoundrel, and that, and that, and that? The real point being, I am better than you. Prior to becoming a minister, I worked in the field of behavior management. Doing that work provided me some intense training in the art of exercising judgment without being judgmental. Now you may be thinking, behavior management, what's that? Well, I worked with clients who were people with developmental disabilities and also had very problematic behaviors like screaming, hitting, frequent interrupting, and they often also had serious behavior deficits, things they didn't do enough of or didn't do well enough at, like being able to manage themselves at mealtime or to be able to stay engaged in activities. To parents of young children, this may seem quite normal, but my clients were adults, so it was a somewhat serious situation. In the behavior management program where I worked, we developed specific behavior plans, mostly rewards or prompts, to help clients learn to behave more one way and less another way. Clearly, there were some value judgments being made regarding what are good and bad ways to behave. Part of my job was to define the behavior problem and the behavior goal, which had to be done very carefully. Subjective, vague standards like, stop being so annoying, which is so common in ordinary life, just didn't cut it. I spent a good deal of time carefully observing people. Did Greg just work continuously for 15 minutes, which might be his goal? Is he or is he not engaging in destruction of property, which he's supposed to do less of? In other words, during that period in my life, I was watching people like a hawk, judging whether and to what extent they were fulfilling my behavior goals for them. We do it in everyday life to some extent, but I had a professional license to do it. At first, there was a tendency to take my clients' misbehavior personally, to be irritated with them when they didn't behave reasonably. But you know, in the rehab setting, the absurdity of that game just became so clear. I mean, the fact that they did not behave reasonably was why they and I were there together. If they behaved better, as would sometimes happen, they would move on to somewhere else, and another person would come into the program whose behavior was sufficiently problematic. Those were the rules of the game. So on a given day, maybe they're being cooperative and I'm giving them praise and such, and it's all going smoothly. Or maybe they're throwing chairs and screaming obscenities, and I'm talking them down, or even physically restraining them, and they're spitting on me, and it's very unpleasant. Either way, I came to realize that on some deeper level, it was really not that much different. It was just this dance we were doing. These people needed somebody like me to exercise judgment on their behalf so they could learn to behave better. They agreed to it. They were in the program voluntarily and could leave at any time. And society, in its benevolence, had arranged for us to be together. So here we go. We're each doing our thing. No need to take it personally. Well, let's consider a different kind of situation. Smallpox was an infectious disease which had been killing and blinding and disfiguring people by the tens of millions since ancient times. As a result of an intense worldwide inoculation campaign, that disease was eradicated in 1980, one of the greatest but little celebrated achievements in human history. To give you a sense of the scope of this disease, and therefore the value of its eradication, it's estimated that even just in its final 100 years, after all those centuries, just in the last 100 years, it killed 500 million people, 500 million. And as a sidebar, I'd like to pause for just a moment of appreciation. How many hundreds of millions of people suffered the agonies of that terrible disease? How many hearts were torn by witnessing loved ones tormented by it? How many prayers of relief went out? 2 months ago, May 8th, was the 40th anniversary of the certification by the World Health Organization that it had been eradicated. There is no more smallpox. Back to my story. So in the last stage of the smallpox eradication campaign, the disease had been reduced to just a few small pockets in India and in Africa. If it could be stamped out in those places, it would be extinguished. So a great deal depended on getting the people who lived nearby those last active cases vaccinated so it wouldn't come back on us. But then, as now, some people resisted vaccination on various grounds. In some cases, the decision was made to forcibly inoculate them. In one such case, during the night, the inoculation team busted into the hut of a family which had refused vaccination on religious grounds. The father of the family grabbed a pole and chased the intruders out into the yard, where he was overpowered by a waiting squad of police officers. They pinned him to the ground while the medical staff administered the vaccine. The mother and the children resisted violently as well, biting and kicking for all they were worth. And one by one, they were subdued and administered the vaccine. When it was all over, they faced each other in the yard, taking in what had just happened. After a moment, the father strode over to his garden and plucked one of the last produce of the season. He walked over to one of the doctors and presented him with the vegetable. Asked what that was for, the father said that, according to their religion, getting sick or not was something that must be left to God's will. So it was their duty to resist this medical interference with all their strength, which they have done. He acknowledged that the medical staff say that it is their duty to vaccinate, even if by force, which they have done. Now it's over and in God's hands. That being the case, he finds that now he has guests, and duty requires that he offer his guests food, which he does. So we have radically divergent worldviews here, violently opposed judgments as to what ought to be done. Both parties, though, gave it their utmost. The doctors did not say, well, we're on the verge of saving the suffering millions from the scourge of smallpox, but who are we to say this family must be vaccinated? No, they made a difficult judgment that the use of force was justified in such a case. The resistors, on the other hand, did not say, who are we to argue with the experts? I guess we have to lay aside our religion if they say so. No, they stuck to their own sense of integrity, and conflict ensued. But where was the self-righteousness? Where was the hostility and the demonization of the other side? Afterward, where was the resentment and the threat of retaliation? Each side exercised their judgment in the matter and acted accordingly, but they did not get judgmental toward those whose sincere judgment was different. I think this lays an inspiring and challenging example before us. Yet, ego-wise, the vaccine resistors at least had the solace of knowing that their opponents had benevolent intentions toward them. What about being overpowered by forces which do not mean us well? That's harder for the ego to stomach, isn't it? I think of the experience of Mohandas Gandhi early in his career in South Africa. After enduring daily humiliations and insults in white privileged society, one day he was set upon by an angry white mob for his organizing efforts and was beaten severely. Most of us would be enraged, and not without reason. Yet Gandhi refused to press charges and, more remarkably, harbored no grudge. Later, during his many years of struggling with the British authorities for justice in India, Gandhi was repeatedly betrayed by them. He neither wavered in his judgment as to what was right, nor did he waver in insisting on justice. And yet he steadfastly refused to ever cast his political opponents as enemies or to treat them uncharitably. For he didn't imagine he was trying to defeat them, actually. He knew that in the larger scheme, he was struggling with them, not ultimately against them, even though they did not view it that way. I think this reflects deep wisdom. So, who are you to make your best judgment and then engage the world with all your heart? Well, Who are you not to? There isn't really anything else to do. Give the vaccination. Resist the vaccinators. Offer the food and accept it. I invite you now to enter into a moment of quiet contemplation. Be gently but vividly aware of being alive this moment. As you breathe in and out, in and out, bear heartful witness to the stream of consciousness, to the flow of this living experience.
We support UUCS through our pledges, our time, and connections with one another. We support the Salem community through donations to the Marion and Polk Food Share for the month. And for the month of July, we support the Oregon Black Pioneers. Joining us this morning to speak about the Oregon Black Pioneers is the current board president, Willie Richardson. I've known Willie for many years. Her daughters, Chantel and Shirley, and I went to high school together at South Salem. Her daughter, Chantel, and I were stand partners in the flute section in the wind ensemble. Good morning, Willie.
Good morning. How are you this morning?
I'm good, thank you.
Good. First, let me thank you for inviting me this morning to come and share just a little bit about the Oregon Black Pioneers. But first, on behalf of the board, we are honored and humbled to be the recipient of your Share the Plate offerings. Oregon Black Pioneers was founded in 1993 to research, recognize, and commemorate the culture and heritage of African Americans in the state of Oregon. We're now in our 27th year of sharing this rich and largely unknown history around the state. We do presentations to schools, colleges, businesses, civic organizations. We do large and small scale exhibits. In the last 10 years, we have curated 4 major exhibits at the Oregon Historical Society's History Museum. Perseverance, Blacks in Early Oregon. All Aboard, Railroading and Portland's Black Community. A Community on the Move. And Racing to Change, Oregon's Civil Rights Years. We currently have an exhibit, Racing to Change, Oregon's Civil Rights Years, the Eugene Story, at the Museum of History and Culture, located at the University of Oregon. For those of you that have attended either of these exhibits, we thank you very much for your support. We also published 2 books, Perseverance, A History of African Americans in Oregon's Marion and Polk counties, and a book in the Image of American series called African Americans of Portland. We're currently experiencing growth and reached our capacity as an all-volunteer board. And as a result, we have now hired our very first executive director to assist the board in continuing to fulfill our mission. We are searching now for financial resources to develop a virtual museum, which we hope to have online in 2020 to make this history more widely available in a national and international way. We also will begin to re-engage in the conversation about a brick and mortar museum here in Oregon. If it is determined that in our next main effort, we will begin conversation with the broader Oregon community. Again, this morning, I want to thank you very much for your thinking of us and wanting to support us financially. To each of you, I ask that you be safe, that you be well, and that you be healthy.
Thank you, Willie. We appreciate you coming and talking to us this morning. Please send your checks to UUCS or visit the website to donate. Thank you for maintaining the community of UUCS and helping the wider community of Salem. From the UUCS homepage, click on Donate and then follow the instructions. We take the light from our chalice, lighting the social justice candle as a symbolic reminder of the light and justice that we carry out into the world. As we extinguish our chalices, let us reflect on these words from Leo Babauta from Zen Habits. I try to remember how to stop being judgmental by using the dual method. 1, don't pass judgment. 2, understand. 3, accept. And 4, love.
Our closing hymn today is Though I May Speak with Bravest Fire. It's number 34 in the gray hymnal. Though I may speak with bravest fire and have the gift to have not love, my words are vain as sounding brass and hopeless gain. Though I may give all I possess and striving so not be given by love within, the prophet soon turns strangely thin. Come, Spirit, come, our hearts control, our spirits long to be
Let us imagine joining hands with our community members, guests, family, and friends, saying these words together. May faith in the spirit of life, hope for the community of earth, and the love for the sacred in one another be ours now and in all the days to come.
Hi, I'd like to tell you about a newly formed connections team. The purpose is to provide opportunities for connections and relations within the congregational community through coordination and facilitation of Soul Matters groups, Journey to Belonging, and other social activities. Our mission statement is creating opportunities for connections and spiritual growth. Our main function is to organize and facilitate Soul Matters Connections groups, train and support Soul Matters Connections group facilitators, assist the minister in organizing and facilitating as needed Journey to Belonging sessions that allow people to explore their spiritual journey in 3 sessions, past, present, and future. And be a clearinghouse for social activities that promote connections and sense of belonging for members through vetting ideas for events that are brought to the team. This includes assistance with registration and promotion, as well as assisting office staff with certain large community events. Right now, we are working on registration for next year's connections groups, which start in September. Registration is going on now, so please look at the website for that. Some themes this year include renewal, deep listening, and healing. Also, starting in September, there is going to be a Zoom fellowship time after the services, where people will have a chance to greet one another, as well as break out into smaller groups for conversation. We need people who would feel comfortable guiding those smaller breakout groups. So please contact us if you would like help. If you would like to help with the Zoom fellowship time, have questions about connections groups, or would like to help with social activities for our congregation. You can reach us at connectionsteam@uusalem.org. And thank you for being part of such a loving community.